This episode is powered by Safety FM.
The Crucial Talks podcast with your host, Mike Sedam.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Crucial Talks podcast. I'm your host, Mike Sedam. And if you could do me a quick favor, I'd really appreciate it if you could rate the podcast and subscribe to it. That would help us tremendously. Also, if you have any questions for me, please feel free to reach out to me by visiting www.crucialtalks.com or through LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, email, whatever works for you. Now, as you know, the Crucial Talks podcast really focuses on a strength-based, positive approach to human behavior. We focus on how to get the most out of our work and life by having stronger relationships, trust, and self-esteem gained from groups. Lately, you may have seen some of my posts about workplace bullying and the workplace experience. And I've pointed to some of my past episodes that can help people in those areas. Now, because of those posts, I was able to make contact with a few people that think like I do, that want to have this positive workplace experience, that want to help people realize that goal of having a positive work experience. They want people to have a better experience at work. They want people to believe that there is no place for bullying or abuse in the workplace. And they are focused on helping others that have to deal with those toxic environments. And today's guest is Deb Falzoi. Did I say that right, Deb?
It's a Falzoi.
Falzoi,
yeah,
okay.
Pretty close.
So today's guest is Deb Falzoi, and she created Dignity Together. Now, this is an organization that is focused on helping workers cope with workplace abuse and provides a resource for employees or employers to provide healthy workplaces. So today, I'm really, really happy that Deb gets to join us on this discussion about a positive workplace experience. How are you doing today, Deb?
Great. How are you doing?
I am doing good. And as we move into this conversation about how to make the workplace better, how to prevent bullying, how to give workers resources to kind of combat this workplace bullying issue, can you tell us a little bit about you and how you got to this place where you're really a champion for a positive workplace experience? How did you get to this place where you're trying to help so many people?
Sure. So about 10 years ago, I was actually bullied at work. It was a job where there were false accusations, some sabotage in it. I was in a kind of a unique situation because a lot of people who feel bullied at work tend to feel isolated, and the bully might get others to join in. But in this case, the bully was actually, being abusive towards a bunch of people who ended up doing what I would call like textbook reporting of the abuse. So going to higher ups, going to HR, and at every turn, the situation was just ignored. I was working in the Boston area at the time and just looked online for resources and couldn't find much of anything. I didn't really even know what to call what was happening. I eventually found that it was called workplace bullying or workplace abuse. And I found a professor at Suffolk Law who had authored legislation about workplace bullying to hold employers accountable for abusing employees at work. So I connected with him, and we had a small group put together to try to make this legislation, to try to have a backing with the legislation. And we've just been running with it ever since. My background's in marketing, so I've been working on the awareness building side of it. And so I get a chance to correspond directly with people who've been abused at work. And I hear a lot of stories. And so I sort of found that people were having trouble finding resources of what to do in their exact situation while they're being bullied, and on the healing end of it. I also found that a lot of people weren't finding therapists who understood the issue. And I also found through my own experience in management of understanding what not to do, but not necessarily understanding what effective ways are to let employees, have a feeling of having power at work. So through Dignity Together, this organization that I started, I'm able to help people through online classes. We're starting free live support groups nationwide. We're trying to get people the help that they need to take them out of isolation, to help them feel validated with what they're dealing with, to help them understand that they're not the problem in this, and then to get them connected with therapists who understand the situation. And then on the other side, to help managers have some tools to learn how to manage without having to resort to abuse tactics if they're interested in that. A lot of managers are interested in just power, but this would be specifically for managers who want to help their employees but just don't know how.
Well, and I think you said a couple of key points there that I want to touch on. And the first one is huge. And the first one is that you said that a lot of people that feel bullied at work, they feel isolated. And this notion of isolation due to workplace bullying or due to workplace abuse is huge when we're talking about people, because people we're social animals that get esteem from social belonging. So one of these issues that I see, and then I hear coming from you, and I hear that word isolated again, is the fact that when people are bullied at work or they are abused in some way at work, even if it's not physical, right? It could be mostly mental, they feel isolated. And then you said that Dignity Together and the tools that are available take them out of isolation. So I'd like to kind of hit on this topic of isolation, how it relates to the workplace experience. So what do you see with respect to isolation as kind of being a negative thing? Like when somebody's cut from the herd or when they feel alone at work, what does that actually do to performance, or what's that do to their psychological ability, their cognitive ability to do their job?
Yeah, so one of the techniques that abusers will often use with workplace bullying is gaslighting. So they'll convince the target over time that they're the actual problem. We see that a lot with domestic abuse. And that can often be, lead to feelings of incompetence and inadequacy, not feeling good enough for the target. But then the abuser will also convince others that this is the case. So you'll have a highly competent, highly ethical employee whose competence and ethics often pose a threat to the bully because they might not or often don't possess that same level of competence and ethics. And so they convince other people that the target's not the problem as a way to sort of get people to not pay attention to their own flaws. So then that leads to isolation. And then that convincing that the target that they're not good enough starts to kind of make that problem become true. So because they're suffering from anxiety or depression or PTSD, they can actually, their performance can actually go down, and the very image that the bully's trying to create actually eventually becomes true. So we just see a lot of cases where there's people feeling isolated and not having that social connection at work because others, first of all, they don't want to become the next target. So they just sort of become the yes people with the boss, but also they just sort of buy into that story that the bully tells.
Well, and it kind of sounds like an old quote. I don't even know how old it is, but it really comes down to this quote that says, I am not who you think I am. I'm not who I think I am. I am who I think you think I am. So it almost sounds like because these workplace bullies or other employees are trying to kind of cut somebody out from the herd or separate somebody because they themselves feel threatened, the person that is the target seems to start believing that, hey, all of these people, think this about me. So now then they start believing that, and it propagates into their behavior actually changing to fit that mold that all of a sudden they've been cast into.
Right. Yeah, they start to believe, well, if everybody else believes this, then it must be true.
Gotcha. And so isolation seems to be a major issue with the workplace experience. So one of these tools you talked about is to bring people out of isolation. So how do you bring them out of isolation? And when you do that, when they come out of isolation, how does that actually change their behavior, or at least change their perception at work, how they perceive the work experience, and how does that impact their well-being?
So a lot of people over the years, when they have discovered a lot of information I've actually put out from legislation that I'm working on around this, they feel this huge sense of relief. They feel like, they start to read descriptions of what workplace abuse looks like and how it manifests in, stress symptoms and what some of the tactics are. And it becomes really textbook, and they just feel this sense of relief that they're not the problem. And so I do a lot of work. I have a closed Facebook group where people can connect with other people, and I've gotten a response that is kind of a lifeline for them. And I also have an online class where I teach people not just the basics of what workplace abuse is, so they can, understand how their situation fits into sort of these textbook situations, but also gives them like short-term and long-term tools so that they can maybe detach in the short term or just reframe what's happening to them, and also just get back to defining themselves on their terms. So they might be people, or they're often people who maybe had very authoritarian parents and associated love with approval because the love wasn't unconditional. And so they're used to defining themselves by how other people define them. And I do a lot in the online course with getting people back to like what they define themselves as. And then we're also in the process of launching live peer support groups nationally so that people can have that like live connection with other people who've experienced this, because it's such an epidemic, but it's also something that not a lot of people talk about. It's not a household term. It's not something that a lot of people are necessarily aware of, but as soon as they hear that term, they start to be able to Google articles on it, and they start to be able to just get taken out of that isolation.
Well, and it sounds like you're hitting this from a couple of different angles that actually impacts this feeling of isolation. And I love how you're doing it, because I actually just had a conversation about this with somebody who coaches and has a large business helping small business CEOs, entrepreneurs, that sort of thing, with the same kind of thing about isolation. And I love this because I see this correlation where it's still all about the people. So what you guys seem to be doing in your organization to help targets of workplace bullying is trying to remove this feeling of isolation. And you're doing it really in a couple ways. One, it looks like you're using social media, you're using technology instead of where technology sometimes can drive people away from each other and almost create isolation. You're finding ways to bring people together through online coaching, through the Facebook group, so that they are more connected nationally, even probably internationally, more connected with other people dealing with the same thing. So now they feel like they're part of a group. And then you're doing something where you're actually creating peer support groups where people can get together. Now, are these peer support groups in person, or are they face-to-face?
They will be. They're brand new, but that's the goal, to bring people together, sort of like in an AA or Al-Anon situation, where they can, maybe create friendships outside of the group, or, even maybe have a mentor, or just to have that like face-to-face human connection where they can really feel validated and not alone in the situation. Yeah, so there'll be live peer support groups.
Well, and that's why I love what you're doing, because you're dealing with each individual and you're recognizing that they do need to be part of groups. They do need to have social bonds. They do need to get esteem from those groups they belong to. And if they're not getting that at work, that could be a huge detriment to people, but also to organizations. And I don't know if you've done any work in this area, but it seems to me that when people are targets of workplace abuse, of workplace bullying, that the organization truly does end up suffering, because it's not just the person that suffers, but because these bonds aren't tight in the workplace, the actual workplace suffers because so much energy is going into protecting ourselves from other people in the organization that we can't focus outside the organization. We can't look for opportunities or threats that are outside because we have so many threats inside the organization. Do you see some of that in the organizations you work with?
Well, working with the organizations is the sort of newer piece of it, but over the years working on the legislation, there's studies that have been done. The Workplace Bullying Institute in Seattle has done a ton of work in seeing how workplace abuse harms actual organizations. And we see things like absenteeism, turnover, what they call presenteeism, which is actually being at work but not concentrating on your work. So all these and then things like health insurance costs going up, or settlement claims, or all of these costs going into being factored into the actual harm on the organization. And then there's things that you can't quantify, just things like the culture, opportunities that may have been missed that are a direct result of having a toxic work culture, which is actually what is ultimately responsible for workplace abuse happening. So if you have higher ups or a CEO that makes sure that there are policies in place and enforced, which is the key part, to make sure that workplace abuse isn't happening, then and other factors that create safe and healthy workplaces, and making that a priority, then people can thrive and be creative and be productive. But when you have higher ups siding with bullies and not having policies and ignoring people when they report incidences of bullying, then that it creates an entire culture where people are sort of in like self-protection mode, and they're not being collaborative. They're not being as productive as they would like to be. They're spending a lot of time on trying to dodge bullying situations. So there is a huge cost to organizations that don't care about the well-being and safety of their employees.
Well, and that's where I really like where you're going with this, because when we're talking about the workplace and companies and what they should be doing with the workplace experience, it does come down to most organizations across the world they're really good, and they're able to get to this place where, okay, they can provide a paycheck, and they can provide the minimums of what people need physiologically, right? They can provide the bathrooms, and they can provide the required breaks, and they can provide that sort of stuff, health insurance. But that's kind of like the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But where excellent organizations exist is really at the top, where they are providing self-actualization and esteem and those sorts of things. But what I've seen, and what it sounds like the research into workplace abuse and workplace bullying has shown, is that many organizations aren't able to do that. They don't provide what people actually need at the higher ends of Maslow's hierarchy, at what actually people need for esteem and for behavior and to feel belonging. And it seems like, and I'm looking at your website, it seems like majority of employers actually make the problem worse when they find out about it.
Right. Most of them ignore it. So this is this is sort of where the legislation piece comes in, is that if most employers are ignoring the situation because they don't want liability for acknowledging it, then we need our governments to actually have workplace abuse laws so that the liability will be on the employer for not doing something about the abuse.
Well, and not doing something is, you might as well just condone it.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Well, and so when we're talking about these employers, right, we're talking about the organization as a whole, but these organizations are made up of all these different roles people play, the workers, the supervisors. And so when I looked at your website, I'm also seeing that the majority, I mean, it's 61% based on the information you have, but 61% of abusers are supervisors. I mean, to me, that's pretty shocking because, in my opinion, supervisors, leaders should be in a position where they're trying to help their employees and they're trying to create a cohesive, trusting team. It's kind of scary to look that 61% of the abusers were supervisors.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of situations where it's basically an abusive power situation where a manager either just has this worldview that that workplaces are about competition and power, and they're trying to protect themselves rather than caring about the actual organization, or they're just plain old not trained properly in how to manage. But this is why we see such a higher incidence of workplace abuse in the healing professions, because we have, in areas like nursing, teaching, government, nonprofits, we have people who care more about the organization and, collaboration. And that worldview directly opposes, a higher up who might come in who cares mostly about their power and mostly about, abusing that power and having people fall in line with their orders, and creating more of like a dictatorship culture rather than a collaborative culture where people can feel heard for the expertise that they're bringing in.
Well, and that's a huge deal for me, just listening to you talk, because it really comes down to supervisors, managers, people in positions of power over other people that are looking at it like that. And that really comes down to, are we going to view workers as problems we need to solve, or are we going to view workers and line personnel as valuable and value adding to the organization, value adding to the mission? It really seems like it comes down to this issue of perception on how are supervisors looking at workers. Are they looking at workers as problems to be solved, or as people that add value to the solutions and to the opportunities that the organization gets to be a part of? It just seems like, with a number that high, it just seems like supervisors are taking this view of people as problems and not people as value.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what they're doing. They're perceiving, it's kind of like perceiving the worker as the enemy, really, rather than and also putting like money over people in a lot of situations, rather than seeing that putting effort and support into your people will actually help you make money. And it's an area also, is just recently read a book called Dying for a Paycheck, written by a professor at Stanford. His name is Jeffrey Pfeffer, and he wrote a lot about how we have regulations for, the environment that force companies to, meet certain regulations because we as a culture decide that we care about our environmental health, but we don't have that same outlook towards our employees and their well-being. We don't have, as a culture, our governments aren't regulating, aren't enforcing. We don't have laws for companies and managers to care about employee well-being and to make sure that the employees aren't being abused. But, he talks about a whole host of other issues like layoffs and healthcare costs and things like that. But, workplace abuse absolutely falls into, something that we're not regulating as a culture.
Well, and so this is where it is really leading me now. Now, we talked about the individual, the targets that are being targeted for workplace bullying or workplace abuse. And now we're moving into organizations and how they deal with it, that a lot of them ignore it either because they don't understand what they can do or they just choose not to do something, and it actually almost condones that workplace abuse and makes it worse. And then we're moving into the people that are actually doing it, whether knowingly or unknowingly, in this role of supervisor or manager, that are propagating and actually being the workplace bullies. So if there are people listening that are in this role of supervisor and they're thinking, wow, do I do that? Do I micromanage my employees? Do I think that they are going to mess up? Am I coming from a place of negativity instead of positivity on how I view my workers? What kind of tools can they use to change their view, or what kind of skill sets, or what should they focus on to get out of this place where they might be thinking right now, hey, maybe I'm a workplace bully and don't even realize it? What kind of techniques and tactics can they now use to move away from a toxic work environment? I mean, what can they do to create a more positive work environment?
So I'm working on a class now, an online class for managers that will go over, first of all, their mindset of needing humility and not necessarily needing all of the answers, but needing humility with their workers and, acknowledging their power basically, but also getting into the nitty gritty of, defining goals with their employees and, first defining a vision and then defining goals and getting everybody working along that vision, but from a concrete way of setting goals and making sure they're on track with their goals. So a way to focus employers and managers on things, specific tools that they can use to, I actually don't like the word empower, but to just acknowledge the power their employees already have, so that they're doing things in a way where they can trust their employees and acknowledge the expertise that they bring to the table, while still making sure that they're working towards the goals that will get the company further along in whatever it is that they're focusing on, so that to their vision. So it will be a whole series of videos that managers can watch to anything from how often to meet with an employee who might not be on track with their goals, to how to have conversations with employees where they're not getting caught up in gossip and they're getting focused back on how they can help their employee or their coworkers. So different tools that employers and managers can use so that they don't develop toxic management habits, before they can even start managing people, or if they have developed those toxic tactics, what they can switch to that might be more effective.
Well, and it does sound like that it goes along with a lot of studies into social groups and in-groups and out-groups, and how you can bring them closer together, how you can remove conflict. All of those things really comes down to what you're saying, because you're talking about defining vision, defining goals, making sure they're on track with their goals. I mean, those are things we've heard forever when it comes to businesses and dealing with companies and how do you meet your metrics and all that stuff. However, it seems like you're coming from a better place, a different place, where you recognize that what you're trying to do is create this superordinate goal, this thing that people, no matter what their role, can go after, but they can go after it in a way that isn't just, hey, I better hit these marks because if I don't, I get in trouble. It really comes down to empowering people or recognizing employee power to reach those things because it gives them a sense of purpose. That if you do it the right way, it's not going to be viewed by the worker as, hey, I better do this or I'm going to get in trouble, or hey, I better do this to keep the supervisor off my back, or hey, I better do this because I just don't want to suffer their wrath because they're a target of workplace abuse. But really it comes down to, hey, we're in this together and I am trying to strive to reach these things because it gives me a sense of purpose. It gives me a sense of belonging to this group that I trust, that I have a relationship with, because it sounds like we're still trying to do the same things business has done forever, reach our goals, meet our marks, make sure the metrics are right, but we're coming at it from a different place, a place of positive perception about the worker and about the team and about the organization. That's kind of what I'm hearing from you. Am I on track here?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So aligning everybody along the purpose so they can all feel like they're on a winning team. This obviously wouldn't be necessarily for somebody who cares only about their power, but more for people who might be in a new situation where they know they don't want to be abusive towards their employees and do the wrong thing, but they just don't know what the right thing is, or they've struggled with trying to figure out things that, tools to bring out the power in their workers, and they're, maybe resorting to things that aren't working. So this is an opportunity for people to find out what does work, and then also talk to other managers and employers, and have that same online connection with other people who might be struggling with some of the same issues that they are.
Well, and I would say this, that there are people out there that are kind of on the tail end of the bell curve that are all about the power. But what I would like to say for any of the executives, the bosses, the people that are out there that have the ability to get rid of those people, that do that. I mean, if you actually have somebody that is all about the power that's creating a toxic environment, sometimes you can't change them and maybe you just need to get rid of them. And I would also say to the people that may not have that ability to get rid of these toxic supervisors because they're protected some way, that you just can't fire them, you can't get rid of them, whatever it happens to be, that if you institute some of these things and the whole bell curve of your supervisory staff moves to the right toward the positive, now those people start feeling isolated. It's almost like you're now operationalizing, or you're weaponizing the workplace abuse, workplace bullying, the things that come about, the isolation and that sort of thing that might actually change the behavior of that negative person. Because, boy, that one toxic supervisor can create a cancer in the organization. So, Deb, what you're doing really seems to resonate. I mean, it resonates with me, and I think it's going to resonate with a lot of people out there that are interested in this and want to have a great workplace experience. So the people that want to find out more, because it sounds like there's a lot of stuff you're doing now, but there's also a lot of positive stuff on the horizon. How do people get in touch with you? How do they follow what your organization's doing? How do they see what's coming on the horizon? What's the best way for people to get in touch with you? And what kind of services are you offering to people?
The best way to reach us is to just go to dignitytogether.org. We have everything on there. We're pretty active on Facebook as well, and a little bit of Twitter. But yeah, those are the best ways to reach us, and to reach me directly at info@dignitytogether.org. But yeah, the management piece is on the horizon, but we have, we're very active now with the target end of it. People can dive right in, getting support online on Facebook and taking classes and that sort of thing.
Well, that sounds great. I will put a link to dignitytogether.org in the show notes, because I really think this is an important topic. I mean, today we covered so much. We covered the fact that isolation really is causing issues in the workplace. I mean, this feeling of isolation from others in your workplace that comes about from workplace bullying or workplace abuse does seem like a major issue. And I love the fact that you're trying to overcome that, not only through online technology means, but actually trying to create face-to-face, in-person, peer support groups that can help people. And then moving into understanding that organizations need to have a way to deal with workplace abuse, because ignoring it is just as bad as condoning it or doing it. I mean, you really have to take action to prevent it, to change the culture, to not allow it to happen. And then I love the fact that you're moving into a place where you are going to give people that want it the tools to make sure that they aren't actually being workplace bullies, or they aren't actually creating a workplace experience that is more toxic, but you're trying to give people tools so that they create this more creative, trusting work environment where people can actually thrive. I love all of that. So for everybody out there, if you get a chance, go check out dignitytogether.org, see what they're doing, follow what they're doing, because it sounds like there's some great stuff on the horizon. And Deb, I really wanted to thank you for coming on to the Crucial Talks podcast and talking to us about workplace abuse, workplace bullying, but really coming at it from a positive recognition of, hey, people are the strength of our organizations, of our companies, and I love what you're doing. So thank you so much for coming on to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Mike. I appreciate it.
Well, I think I learned a lot from this. I really hope people check this out, because we do need to have better workplace experiences. The return on investment for doing that is huge. So anybody out there, if you have a chance, I'd also love for you to visit my website at www.crucialtalks.com. Reach out for me if you need anything. And please leave a review for the podcast. Share it, rate it, because if you got any value from this talk we just had with Deb, I really think that other people can get value also. So please share the podcast and review it so more people can find us. Have a great week. And remember, if we want to understand behavior, we need to understand what drives people.
Please review, share, and subscribe to the Crucial Talks podcast. Visit crucialtalks.com.